Next up, we have Arden Koehler. Arden manages the 80,000 Hours website, including the online content and marketing team, with a particular focus on the content. Before starting at 80,000 Hours as a writer in 2019, she did a PhD in philosophy at New York University in ethics and attitudes towards time. So please welcome Arden.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Historically, effective altruism has really leaned into ways of thinking and doing good in the world that emphasize the value of flexibility, or the ability to figure out which opportunities are best and to switch directions as needed to be more effective. Cause neutrality, not being married to any particular cause so that you can work on whatever you think is most pressing, is paradigmatic here. But cause prioritization research, including fundamental research in ethics, as well as more applied charity evaluation, are all also investments in our ability to find and keep track of what does more good and switch to that. But we're at a point now where distinct fields and projects are gaining momentum. And in particular, AI safety is developing into its own field and going kind of mainstream. So not everyone who gets involved is going to do so through EA. And people who might work on AI safety, or in any other particular area, are not necessarily that interested in thinking about cause prioritization or philosophical ethics. A lot of people just want to keep their head down and stay focused on pushing forward the particular problem that they've chosen because they think it's important. So it's been on some people's minds what it means for all of this to be under one umbrella, and whether there's any tension there. First, I want to say that I don't think there's any tension at all in principle between spending practically all your time just head down, pushing forward your particular project, and being really into effective altruism. Because pursuing that project could just be what you honestly think matters most. For example, take orchestrating an effort to secure seed banks to grow food for everyone in the case of an agricultural disaster. You might think that just working on that is what you can do that matters most, because the stakes are really high, and maybe you're in a great position to contribute. And I think that is what is at the heart of EA, just trying to pay a lot of attention to what you honestly think matters most. I think a lot of the other core values of EA basically stem from this. I won't talk about all of the things on the slide, but I think that incessantly asking what really matters most here has been behind many of the signature values and ideas of effective altruism. Take scout mindset. This is the attempt to stay curious and open-minded and to try to really figure out what's true rather than fight for a particular position. The reason people value this, I think, is that they find that when they really think about it, they don't feel like having been right this whole time in the recent argument they've been having really matters much at all compared to actually understanding the world and actually understanding the world in a way that allows them to better act within it. Or think about unconventional ideas like earning to give. This comes from noticing how much good work gets done in the world is actually what matters, much more than with whose hands it's done with. And being attentive to what matters also means being realistic about outcomes instead of overly optimistic about what we can get done. Since what happens as a result of what we do matters a lot more than what we hoped or intended. This means prioritizing between causes, interventions, jobs, or projects, all the way down until it's more trouble than it's worth. Because you're not going to be able to do everything, not even everything good, not even everything important. And I think you can tell a similar story about the role of really paying attention to what matters for a lot of other important ideas, like radical empathy and scope sensitivity. But some ways of trying to pay attention to what matters look and feel pretty different from one another. In particular, some ways look like investing in flexibility, and others look more like what I'm going to call dedication. I already mentioned the idea of flexibility and how central it is in effective altruism. Here, I'm just going to add one more illustrative example. I think that encouraging criticism of EA ideas as in last year's EA Criticisms contest, is partly an investment in flexibility. Ideally, it helps us see where we're wrong and change focus, and encourages a culture of questioning and holding on to ideas lightly, and being willing to change our minds. On the other hand, another really natural thing to do when you're paying close attention to what you think matters most is to zoom in on the area that you think is most pressing, or where you think you can make the biggest positive difference, and do what you can to push forward progress there. I'm going to call this dedication, which I think is an imperfect word for it, because it sounds like a virtue, and I don't think the opposite is exactly a vice. But the thing I'm trying to get at is the idea of taking steps to get more done efficiently, even if it means making commitments that make you less able to change what you're doing later, or requires a focus on execution within a narrower band of options, rather than always being open to re-examining your assumptions and going back to the broader strategic picture. This can allow you to bring more focus and ultimately more power to accomplish what you're trying to do. For example, building a complex organization to work on a particular intervention, like this example of securing seed banks in the case of an agricultural disaster, might mean dedicating years to a multi-stage plan and hiring a specialized staff, both of which will limit your flexibility. But it means you can really build something, and that you stand a better chance of actually putting this form of global insurance in place at a large scale. One thing I want to make clear: dedication, as I'm trying to use the concept, doesn't always involve making explicit commitments. It includes specialization, scaling up initiatives, or just deciding not to open up some questions. Anything that makes it de facto harder to change direction in exchange for making something happen more powerfully or more efficiently is an instance of this value. So we can see the value of both flexibility and dedication, but they trade off against one another. And this happens in all kinds of places. Take hiring. In my own case, I have to think about whether to hire specialist writers with a deep background in a subject, or generalist ones, who can dive into a lot of topics but aren't really experts on anything. Specialists might allow us to produce kinds of work that a team of generalists just can't. But if our plans change, or if we lose capacity somewhere on the team, a generalist might be more able and more willing to jump in and fill the gap. The trade-off also comes up in your career. Skilling up in something like management or communications gives you flexibility because they're useful in a lot of contexts. On the other hand, imagine you could know ahead of time that a niche speciality, like, say, resilient crop genetics, would end up being crucial in the future. Then getting a PhD in that would plausibly be the most powerful thing you could do to have a positive impact. Okay, and this one I'm a bit less sure about, but that also means it might be more interesting. I suspect that a dedication flexibility trade-off is also part of what's going on with people's unease around deference. Deferring to someone else allows you to form beliefs a lot faster than you could otherwise if you had to do all the investigation yourself. So you can get down to the business of execution. Done right, it's efficient and high leverage, but it's a soft form of commitment. If a lot of people are deferring in a group, it makes them less flexible because they're not equipped to figure out where we should change things. Imagine, as an exaggerated example, that only one person in effective altruism ever looked into what the world was like and what we should do, and everyone else just listened to them and executed on their vision. Their work would be very high leverage, and as a group we would get a lot done. But we'd have invested very little in developing the ability to notice where we're going wrong and to do something different. Finally, I think this trade-off comes up in how much to do effective altruism movement building per se versus focusing on building specific fields. EA's emphasis on equipping people to figure out what they think matters most and switch to that makes it an investment in flexibility. And it's really valuable that people in this community will change what they're doing based on new evidence. But building particular fields could be higher leverage and more efficient. Not everyone who can contribute is as interested as your average EA is in cause prioritization or questioning foundational assumptions. And these things do require time and energy. So a cause-specific group might be able to pull in more people and spend more time on execution. I said finally just now, but I think this trade-off is at play in a lot of decisions and disagreements, both in EA and just in everyday life. So how can we navigate it? I think the first thing to do is to just notice that it's there. Both flexibility and dedication have value. So if you're finding yourself sacrificing one for the other and feeling bad about it, it might just be fine, because it might just be necessary. And others, of course, are probably doing the same thing. And I think seeing people as making this trade-off differently is one way of understanding some disagreements. Second, probably don't go too extreme in either direction. Imagine if we only ever went in for flexibility as a community. We'd learn a lot and rarely need to backpedal, but we probably wouldn't get much done in the world. Because concrete, on-the-ground projects usually involve some level of investment that can't easily be converted into something else. Flexibility is useful because it allows us to take better opportunities. It's not useful if we never take any of those opportunities. But totally neglecting flexibility is also a mistake, for reasons that are probably pretty familiar to this crowd. The truth is that how to do a lot of good is really non-obvious. Not only is there lots of uncertainty, the landscape also changes with time. So it really matters to be able to adapt. We can also make some moves toward dedication, like doing cause-specific field building, while keeping some of the emphasis on flexibility that EA has traditionally had. Even if you strategically close some questions for a while, you can still encourage a culture of open-mindedness and celebrate it when people switch to something else because they think it'll do more good. Third, keep track of where you're most uncertain and invest in flexibility there. The less confident you are, the more value there is in flexibility, because the more likely it is that you'll want to change your plans as you learn more. And you might be happy to be dedicated in some areas and not others. For example, maybe you're pretty confident in the career strategy of becoming a world-class software engineer. So you're happy to just keep building those skills. But you aren't sure where to work to do the most good. In that case, you might want to develop lots of connections and information flows to make you more flexible about where you work, even if you're dedicated to what you do. Fourth, as a community, we can to some extent take a portfolio approach. Having some people pursue high-leverage projects that require dedication, while having others work on helping us stay more flexible by keeping tabs on different fields, comparing ideas for impact, and publicizing great opportunities as they come up. Fifth, and this looks like a bit of a win-win, which I think is a bit suspicious in this context, but having lots of connections with different fields seems also helpful for both flexibility and dedication. By this I mean being part of multiple communities yourself, EA, but also biosecurity, or AI safety, or the startup community, or the diplomacy community, or just building relationships across these groups and not worrying about community membership per se. In general, sharing resources and ideas with people with different points of view builds flexibility for the same reason that the EA criticism contest does. It helps you see when and how to change your mind. But it also seems helpful for being able to build projects that require specialization or other forms of dedication, because much of the specialized knowledge out there exists in these other fields, as do many people who can add their talents to dedicated projects. Finally, I think staying attentive to what you think really matters most also pays off here. As I said, we're at this moment where lots of people are pursuing high dedication paths in specific areas. This is really valuable. But I think that continuing to pay a lot of attention to what you think matters most, even as you make these kinds of investments, can be a form of flexibility of its own. Because really caring about what matters makes you more likely to notice if a time does come along when you need to unwind and change what you're doing, despite the investments you've made. It makes you more willing to pay high costs of switching when it's important, freeing you up to dedicate yourself to your best guess in the meantime. Thanks for listening. Have a great conference.